What's up everyone, I'm Eldridge and welcome back to the Donkey class reveal series, now for the last time. But as I've said a few times already, this is not going to be at the end of my Camelot Unchained coverage. I'm gonna keep making videos about this game whenever I have a good idea to make a video. Obviously I'm not gonna make a video just about anything, it's gonna have to be a good one, but you should still be able to expect them like once a week or at the very least once every 2 weeks. And you'll find them on the channel, of course. I'll tweet about them if you want to follow me on Twitter. And I will also try my best to remember to post them on the subreddit for Camelot Unchained, so that there are enough avenues for you good folks to find them. Today's final class reveal was of course about which we already knew from last week was the Stealthers. And I have to say that stealth is one of those game mechanics in MMORPGs that very few people are moderate about. For the most part, people either love it or hate it desperately. Personally, I would put myself in the hate camp with a caveat. And that is that I do think stealth can work, it just has to be limited. And there needs to be counters and drawbacks to stealth. It can't just be super invisibility and then I stab you in the back every time. For example, I really liked how stealth worked in Warhammer Online. It had such a short duration that you were rarely caught by complete and entire surprise because you had already seen the witch hunter or witch elf run up toward you and then go into stealth. But at the same time it still worked like a stealth, so they pretty much still got to open on you, you just already knew that it was gonna happen and you had the time to prepare for it. If you want a bad example of stealth, then you have to look no further than World of Warcraft. Because holy crap is the stealth in that game ever awful. Permanent invisibility, check. Rogue comes out of stealth and does a lot of burst damage right away, check. Rogue still does just as much damage as any other DPS class after that, check. But back on the topic of Camelot Unchained, Mark Jacobs has of course decided that merely turning invisible for a bit is not good enough, and so the Veil was born. Basically, all three of these go into an alternate dimension, if you will, only to reappear behind you, stabbing you in the back. And doing this is of course dangerous, and there are plenty of drawbacks associated with Veil walking. City State Entertainment also wanted to have closer interaction with grouping when it comes to stealth characters. In Dark Age of Camelot, by their very nature, stealthers were not especially useful in groups, because they'd usually get smacked out of stealth by a stray AoE effect, and without their out of stealth opening, they were really just light tanks but worse. And so stealthers in Dark Age of Camelot would generally do more solo RVR, meaning they would go out on their own, look for targets and take them down. There were also a lot of small stealther groups around, and some people were even really silly and did stealther zergs with 2 or 3 full groups of just assassins and archers running around rampaging and killing everything. Personally, I have to say I welcome this change of having them be a little bit more intertwined with group play, because having your stealthers be pretty much just solo characters is a little bit of an awkward design, and it puts people in a spot where maybe they don't want to be, maybe they want to play their stealthers in groups. Now I do of course understand that the people who really enjoy running around solo with their stealthers might object to that entire thing being turned around, to their character being entirely group focused and not really that great at soloing anymore. I understand that, and I think solo RBR should still be a strong point of stealthers, but I just think it's cool to have them be group viable as well, because it just broadens the meta game of how people build their groups. And the more different viable group setups there are running around, the better. Firstly, let's take a look at the Arthurian stealther, the Veil Stalker. Now the Veil Stalker has pretty much no ties to mythology or folklore, at least I don't think so, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, but if I'm entirely honest, I didn't even really look because I expected it to be a kind of a fabrication, just like the Veil itself, and there's really nothing necessarily wrong with that. Now I know that may sound weird after me just slamming the Ampath for not being tied in with the lore, but I think that's fine as long as thematically, visually and playstyle wise it still fits with the faction and archetype, and I do think that the Veil Stalker does that just fine. At some point Mark Jacobs went on record as saying that he pretty much made up the Veil, but let's not dismiss it so easily. Let's examine it a bit more. So in Camelot Unchained, the Veil is a mysterious otherworld that sort of functions like a parallel universe or a different dimension or plane. Everything is all foggy and ghost-like there, and players in the real world are only seen as shadows and apparitions. The Veil storms that came when the world went to shit are basically the Veil bleeding through into the real world. But the Veil is not just a fancy stealth mechanic, it's also where magical energies are drawn from. And to receive from or interact with the Veil, some kind of exchange has to happen. Mages pay with blood, Veilstalkers pay with the life essence of their bodies, whatever that's actually going to entail being. But every Celtic mythology has some sort of otherworld, where the fairies come from and where the dead go once they die. Unlike the Christian heaven or the Buddhist nirvana though, these otherworldly places are a little more literal. For example, Tir nan Og, in Irish mythology, the land of the young, is described as a group of beautiful islands off the west coast of Ireland. And it's supposed to be the place where the Tuatha De Danann originally came from. And there's also a bit more to the otherworld in Irish mythology. There are a couple of different interpretations and a couple of different regions in this otherworld. It's all pretty crazy. As there's, for example, also the land of the Sidhe, which are pretty much in Barrow Hills. In Welsh and Gaul mythology, the otherworld is also supposed to be on islands. And you can go to these islands. One of them, for example, is Bull Island. But you can only go to the otherworld if you're invited or if you're dead. And if you think about it that way, that doesn't sound all that different from the alternative dimension Veiled, does it? In Camelot Unchained, the Veilstalker is mechanically probably the most traditional stealther, but thematically quite different from your norm. With stealth classes, we're generally talking about rogues and scoundrels and brigands and assassins and ninjas and all sorts of unsavory characters. But in the case of the Veilstalkers, there's a heavy theme of arcane magic throughout the class, and the Stalker builds Arcane Charge while within the Veil, which grants bonuses outside of the Veil, and some of the abilities also consume Arcane Charge. And that basically means that the Veilstalker is very powerful when first emerging from the Veil, what with also having some really powerful abilities for those situations in particular, and with being able to power them even further with Arcane Charge. But as the fight goes on, the Veilstalker will have to retreat back into the Veil at some point to recover some of that Arcane Charge. From the sound of it, it's not going to be a stamina fighter. It's not supposed to fight in long drawn out battles. It's supposed to jump out of the Veil, do a ton of damage right away, and then at some point get back into the Veil to recharge all of those burst abilities. Next up, we have the Tuatha De Danann stealther, the Red Cap. I gotta say, I'm a teensy bit torn on this one, because I was ready to bet money on the Tuatha De Danann stealther being themed after the Derag Dhu, the Irish vampire lady. I mean, seriously, Mark, how is it not the Irish vampire lady? That's so you in every way. And it being the Red Cap was pretty surprising, but in the end, it is actually very fitting, and I'd have to say it's pretty damn cool. Now, is it cooler than the Irish blood-sucking vampire lady? I'm not entirely sure about that. I think the jury's still out on that one. But I'm not even going to try and argue that the Red Cap is not awesome in every respect. And the reason why I didn't think about the Red Cap is that the Red Cap is a goblin or fairy creature from North English folklore. They're said to inhabit castle ruins and take the form of little old men with red caps. They also happen to be quite the murderous bunch, and so they ambush travelers who travel near the ruins and use the blood of those killed to dye their caps red. Yes, that's all they kill them for. Yes, that is all they kill the travelers for, to make sure that their hats stay nice and red and moist. And they do this because if their caps ever dry completely, they die. And so they have to commit murder often and regularly. Now the Redcaps are also a pretty curious case actually, because red-capped little old people looking gnome guys are common in European folklore at large, but the English interpretation is one of the only bad ones. Usually they're supposed to be helpful spirits. The Irish version of this creature, for example, the Bodachan Sawail, is a helpful spirit that helps old farmers with their farm labor for free because he likes old people. And this ruddy bastard goes around killing people for a fashion statement. In Camelot Unchained, the Red Cap specializes in manipulating blood like one might imagine. They use blood to enter the Veil and steal copious amounts of it from their enemies. And I'm also guessing they will do a lot of bleeding damage on their abilities. There is also an ability listed for the Redcap to consume an enemy corpse to fill up their own blood pool. Now, if I was to have a problem with anything about the Redcap, it would probably be this specific ability. And the reason for that is it was pretty much the entire focus of the Blessed Crow. And I feel having two characters that make use of enemy corpses is a bit much. And if they're central to the Blessed Crow's abilities, then doesn't that kind of suck if the Redcap just keeps stealing them to refill the blood pool? Just saying, that's a bit much of an anti-synergy going on there for my taste. And then lastly, but certainly not least, we have the Viking stealther, the Shadow Walker. And the Shadow Walker doesn't have a direct tie to mythology or folklore either. But darkness and shadow definitely play a big role in Norse and Germanic mythology. Central and Northern Europe were pretty scary places to these ancient tribes. Huge swaths of nigh unbreakable forest, mountains, rock-facey hills, long and pretty damn cold winters, long nights, and a plethora of animals that could kill a man, from boars to bears, from wolves to mooses. And so it's no wonder that there are dozens of scary monsters said to be creeping in the dark, such as the two German creatures of the Alp and the Nachtmar. The Alp is a right scary looking bastard. I mean, look at this guy. And they sit on your chest at night whispering nasty stories to you so you dream badly, and their weight ever increasing until you violently awake, sweating and out of breath. The Alp and the Mara are basically the same kind of creature, it's just that the Alp is pretty much the male version and the Mara is the female version. Maras are also said to enjoy riding the horses of people at night until they are sweaty and exhausted the next morning, eventually driving the horses mad. And may I just say that both of these are delightful fairy tale characters. Yes, that's right, Disney eat your heart out because Germany has the most badass fairy tale creatures. In Camelot Unchained, the Shadow Walker is a more support-focused stealther, making heavy use of shadow magic and providing some strong group synergy, for example in being able to pull enemy stealthers out of the veil with them. The Shadow Walker will also have pretty damn good bonuses when it is night in the game and will be a slight bit weaker in the direct sun. All in all, I think these stealthers are pretty great. They have nice flavor, they have an interesting marriage of theme and mechanics going on, and now we get to the absolute final scoring of this series of class reveals. Now, we have already been told that there are going to be more class reveals in the future, and as soon as there are more class reveals, I'm just going to continue the series, so keep an eye on the channel for that. But through the weeks, for the longest time, it looked like the Tuatha Dé Danann would just carry it away because they had quite the significant lead, but then in the last 2 weeks, the Slaughter Wolf and the Stone Healer took the cake in my book. And now it's actually all decided by the last class reveal. We have 5 points for the Tuatha Dé Danann and 5 points for the Vikings. And I am going to choose the Shadow Walker. I do very much love that the Shadow Walker is taking the design to the batshit crazy levels. It's taking a stealther and turning it into a supporty kind of group synergy class. Simply because, as I said, most of these classes are generally scoundrels. And so it makes sense to reflect some sort of selfishness in their class design. However, I think this Shadow Walker having sort of a stealther that's pretty much a shadow mage in a way, that is a really, really cool thing. And I like the idea a lot. However, I can of course also understand when stealth purists who used to play Dark Age of Camelot and are really set on playing Vikings, I can understand how they will not really like this reveal and how they will be sad that they won't get a Shadowblade 2 Electric Boogaloo. Alright guys, that is it for today. I really hope you enjoyed this series on the 10 class reveals. We now know all 30 of the classes that are going to be in Camelot Unchained in the foreseeable future. That means release and the months afterwards. And I am going to make one more video on the classes next week. I have a few more things that I want to talk about. And after that I'm going to talk about other stuff week for week in the already established Donkey's Lore Corner. And I really hope you guys end up watching that, as I really enjoyed making Camelot Unchained content so far, and I definitely want to continue doing that. But until then, I've been the Cloaking Donkey, and I'll see you in another video.